What I thought I would do today with the time that I've got is to give you sort of a quick walkthrough of what we do, not to sell it to you, but just to communicate to you what it is we do and the range of things that we're involved in. Then secondly, I would like to step back from that and kind of talk about how we got to this place and how we took on the personality and the functions that we did. And then as time permits, I'd like to drill down specifically in a couple of areas where I think you may have some interest, or if you want to focus my attention on something, I'd be happy to do that as well. And as Mike said, please interrupt, just raise your hand if I'm going too fast. I have a lot to say, and so my strategy, frankly, is just to talk fast. So I'll try and get through this in pretty short order. MARC, as indicated in the materials in front of you, is the Association of Local Governments in the Metropolitan Planning Area for the Kansas City region. We were formed in 1972 as a result of a merger between sort of a loose collection of local governments and a federally driven planning agency called MetroPlan. We were created, I gather like you are, by intergovernmental agreement. In our case, the 9 counties, 5 in Missouri and 4 in Kansas, and the 6 largest cities make up the corporate infrastructure of MARC, and then we have representatives from all of the other municipalities in the metropolitan area. I think you all know these groups exist all over the country, and we all have our particular strengths. I think SACOG is most noted for your innovation in planning. Your blueprint work is common knowledge in the field. Your urban-rural connections work is extraordinary. I think what we are noted for is sort of the breadth of responsibilities and roles that we play. We have a wider range of functions and roles and services than many of our counterparts across the country. And as a result of that, have a pretty high level of visibility, a pretty tight connection with our local government leadership in our region. It is a very complicated region. We're similar in size to Sacramento. We're 2 million people. In our case, 119 cities and towns, 9 counties, 2 states, countless special districts. I think we have 64 school districts, 4,400 square miles. It's a big and complicated place. There are lots of bi-state and tri-state areas in America. I think you all know that. I think what characterizes our dynamics is that the population and job base is so evenly split across the state line. It's about 40% in Kansas, 60% in Missouri. It's kind of tilting over time on the Kansas side. And so it is, we've got to come together. Neither side dominates, and in order for us to move forward, we've both got to come together. I would say that state line politics, state line dynamics are sort of the pervading sort of undercurrent of what gets in the way of progress in our particular metropolitan area. I think the other thing that's really interesting about our state line is that it's essentially a residential street. In fact, your chairman lived about a mile away from a residential street that divides Kansas and Missouri. And so there's a very tight social and economic network that crosses seamlessly through the urbanized area every single day, yet there's a highly fractured political network that makes it really hard to bring all of these communities together. We're governed by a 33-member board of all elected officials. It looks very similar to the collection of people gathered around this table. They are all named by their respective jurisdictions, either by a loose formula that sort of approximates population, or the smaller cities, mayors come together and appoint one of themselves to be their representative or their alternate. The work of our organization is carried out through an extensive network of committees, not unlike here. In our case, we have dozens, literally dozens of committees that work on specific issues. They bring together federal officials, state officials, local government officials, lots of professionals, lots of other elected officials who don't necessarily serve on our board, and lots of not-for-profit business and civic leaders. And so it all depends on the issue is how we gather people together. Some of our committees are highly structured with bylaws and representation formulas, particularly those that allocate money or make sort of semi-governmental decisions, but many are sort of loose and open and ad hoc, depending upon kind of the nature of the work that's ahead of the group. Our mission is to advance regional progress through what we refer to as leadership, planning, and action. These are very similar kinds of roles that you play, trying to serve as a problem-solving forum, coordinating policies and plans, and helping to provide a host of services and help the community act on those plans. We are funded in a pretty eclectic way. We are a big agency, but actually we're a lot of little agencies. We have this year a $60 million budget. It's been as high as $75 million, and only about $500,000 of that is flexible. The rest of it is all categorical, raised to accomplish one specific issue or another. So there's a lot of sort of complexity to our financial and administrative affairs. About 80% of that comes from grants, and that includes state and local contributions. And so grants is a pretty big concept. It's not just federal grants. And about 12 to 15% of that is kind of the value of in-kind services. So we actually have about $50 million coming in cash, and the other 5% is in fees. To look at it in a different way, I would say that right now, it varies every year, but right now about 75% of the money that comes through our agency originates at the federal government, and about 15 to 20% comes from local governments, and the other comes from philanthropy or fees or other kinds of revenue streams. I would also say that of every dollar we bring in, about $3 of it goes right back out the door to local governments or community agencies to do one service or another. So if we gain $1, the region gains 3, and likewise if we downsize. We get into and out of a lot of things. Depending upon the needs and priorities of the community, depending upon opportunities to seek funding support, depending upon where there's leadership and interest. The areas that we work on are sort of highlighted in the slides in front of you. Like you, we serve as a metropolitan planning organization, and we do a lot of work in transportation, all of the traditional functions of long-range planning and allocating funds and doing a particular modal work. We're very heavily involved in intermodal activities. We're a major rail center. Your previous conversation was just fascinating to me because we have very similar issues. UP has a big presence in town. In fact, we're helping half a dozen cities acquire some underutilized right-of-way for trail purposes, and I think we have met the other 599 vice presidents. That has been a very long and arduous discussion. This, I think, is finally coming to fruition. We also do a lot of technical studies, as you do. Some of our operations include a signal coordination system. We coordinate and manage something we call Operation Greenlight through a traffic control center that is outside of our main office. And we right now are connecting, I think we're up to about 800 intersections that are wired together, and we use to coordinate traffic flow along major arterials across multiple jurisdictions. Has enormous air quality, transportation, fuel, time savings to doing that kind of coordination. And then we're also able to override the system in a case of an emergency to help with response situations. We run a regional rideshare program. We're very effective at bringing the region together to go after funding opportunities. We had a $50 million regional Tiger grant that brought transit investments into half a dozen jurisdictions around the metropolitan area. We are very focused on environmental issues. We have a lot of natural resource planning. We help to conceptualize and shepherd the creation of a metropolitan greenway system that now has some 300 miles across the metropolitan area. We manage a solid waste management district. These are funds that come in from the state of Missouri from a tipping fee, and we then use that to allocate and invest in alternative waste reduction strategies that are run by a variety of local governments and community groups. We help to develop the region's strategy around air quality compliance and conform that, as you do here, with our transportation planning processes. We're involved in stormwater, do a lot of sort of watershed planning in specific watersheds where there's interest. We help to bring the community together to address big issues. For instance, this is a very typical role we might play. We've brought together 2 state highway departments, a couple of utility companies, several railroads, some dredging companies, and about 12 city governments to form a consortium, and then we're serving under an umbrella. We're sort of serving as the local partner with the Corps of Engineers and dealing with a big issue in our region, which is the degradation of the Missouri riverbed through the Kansas City area that's scouring out and creating lots of infrastructure and water quality problems. And so that's a kind of a role that we would play, as sort of bringing together broad coalitions of interest and then sort of serving as the vehicle for communicating with the federal or other partner to solve a particular problem. We do a lot of emergency response work. We run the region's 911 system. That's a role that's evolved over time from simply paying bills to now we maintain and own and operate the equipment in 43 answer points around the region, and we're helping to work on consolidating some dispatcher centers that are run by various local governments and do a lot of public education. We've helped to manage all of the homeland security resources that have come into the region over the last decade or more, about $70 million. It's been a real effective use of local leadership coming together and really building up some capacity that did not exist prior to those resources. We're responsible for coordinating and tracking and managing hazardous materials that come through the region, which is germane to the previous conversation, and just do a lot of different kinds of emergency. Another role that's probably maybe of interest to you is that we bring together all of the ambulance companies and service providers, some of which are public, some of which are not, and have knit together a system that helps them better coordinate their services, to mass buy ambulance supplies, to develop common protocols in response to emergencies. They've developed a common way for intervening quickly in stroke victims so that we have a sort of uniform response to stroke victims. They have a diversion strategy so that if one of the major hospitals can't take a patient, they can en route divert them to the next available emergency bed. And those kinds of coordinating strategies that have come out of that work for a long period of time. We work a lot in social services. We, for 20 years or more, have been helping to drive the improvement of access and quality in early education. That then led to the administration of a Head Start grant that serves 3 counties in our region and some 2,700 families. We serve as the area agency on aging, which allocates federal and state resources for older adult services, and that in turn has morphed into an initiative that some foundations have asked us to lead, to bring the community together to articulate and pursue a strategy for responding to the rapidly changing demographics in all of our communities for older adults. This is an area where the first suburbs are particularly active. A lot of our older suburbs are aging and yet want to regreen. They want to be friendly and supportive and allow their older population to stay in their communities, yet they want to stay younger. So we call it communities for all aging, and our first suburbs are really leading the strategy for how we design services and facilities and infrastructure and walkability plans that help communities stay fresh in response to different demographics. We're working on some interesting work in coordinating safety net clinics around access to health care, and we're also bringing the region together in a pretty, I think, thoughtful strategy around improving our collective response to homelessness, which is a problem in every metropolitan area. We work a lot on land use and placemaking. We were a grantee for the HUD initiative and have developed and pursue a pretty coherent corridor and center strategy for growth in our metropolitan area, focusing a lot on transit services along those corridors. The 19 communities that were sort of developed in the 50s and 60s, the first suburbs of Kansas City, have come together in a coalition and are doing some pretty interesting work. They've been working for 10 years now. I would say the elected leaders in our region really drive that initiative, everything from mortgage stabilization to coming up with idea books on how people can reinvest in homes that may not have the amenities that the modern market wants, and how with a little bit of money you can keep a home fresh and relevant to a different kind of market segment, to working on energy codes that are appropriate for an older suburban context. We've done a couple commercial redevelopment plans. So there's just sort of a range of specific initiatives that have come out of these coalitions. We work a lot on helping local governments be effective at the local level through joint advocacy. We have a training institute that touches about 8,000 to 10,000 local government leaders every year on everything from policy level issues down to computer classes and building code inspections and a variety of technical training that's been done in a very cost-effective and high-quality way. And then we have more recently really broadened our long-term role, in which I'll talk about a little bit if we have time, in analyzing the regional economy to broaden out our ability to intervene in strategic ways around advancing the ability of our region to remain economically competitive and viable in a really shifting circumstance. So that was a lot. I know I talked fast, but so you can maybe just I really just wanted you to just not necessarily remember any single program, but just to kind of communicate kind of the range of roles and the range of issues that we're engaged in. I will say, even though we're doing a lot, we are not unlike most metropolitan areas. We have our issues, we have our dirty laundry, and since I'm being taped, I'm going to have to say that. Simply because it's a complicated region and we don't always get along. In fact, there's this narrative, I think, around our state line and particularly around economic competition that undermines our ability to bring our community together in cohesive ways. When I compare our work as an agency and as a region across America, sort of my sense is what we do well is that we're really good at this bread and butter stuff that I just blew through. The sort of day-to-day, in the trenches, behind the scene, intergovernmental coordination, where local leaders are coming together and saying, we want to do something together. Oftentimes it'll involve the not-for-profit or business sector because of the nature of the issue. It's really driven by their ability to use their relationships and our capacity to move forward on a sort of a cooperative, value-added intervention. I think the other thing we do pretty well as a region is we have really great civic capacity. Corporate leaders and foundations who really commit their time and energy and leadership to our community, and they work well together. We have some very significant regional agencies, our Chamber of Commerce, we have a regional economic development marketing agency, a regional group of CEOs that's called the Civic Council. We've got a great United Way, we've got a great regional community foundation. We're a strong organization, and all of us know each other, we work together, we collaborate with each other, at least publicly. Sometimes that doesn't happen as seamlessly behind the scenes, but we have a really good track record and really high respect for the role that each one of us play. And so at that level, we've got a really, I think, cohesive civic infrastructure that is a benefit to our region. I think where we fall short is we have had a very difficult time sort of making the big bets on our region. We've had a really hard time building a transit system. We're way behind. Well, the streetcar's coming, but it is way behind. We are decades behind America on investing in alternative transit. Or the big bets around really investing in what will grow our economy. We spend a lot of time and money, we throw a lot of public dollars to move companies across the state line, literally across the street sometimes. And I could give you some hair-raising numbers. Nobody likes it. When we have our meeting like this, all of you sit around and complain about it, but nobody has sort of found a way to unravel that really difficult problem. And then we have social issues. We have some huge issues of racial disparity and economic disparity that have left a good portion of our population isolated and cut out of access to opportunity. And so those are the things that define a region. The cooperation is really important. I'm proud of it. It makes a difference. It brings values to citizens. The civic leadership has made a lot of huge advances in our region. Yet we still, I think, have a lot of work to do as we use that sort of capacity to then sort of make the big bets and the big investments that will really drive the future of the region. What I'd like to do is maybe step back from that, and I need, Madam Chairman, to ask, kind of get the time check. I wanted to kind of step back and talk a little bit more, reflect just sort of what got us to this place and how we operate, but I also don't want to disrupt the flow of your time. And do you want me to just keep going, or you tell me?
When will we break for lunch?
Pardon?
When will we break?
Well, our agendas don't ever have a hard stop. We had said 11, so people may have personal calendars where they're not able to stay for lunch and need to go at 11. I do think so it's really your pleasure. It's sort of 6 of one, half a dozen of another. I guess my 2 cents would be if David could continue with a few more minutes of prepared remarks, and if some people need to leave, they just need to leave. He'll understand that. He works for a board too. And then, maybe in 10 minutes or so, then we could take a breath and move. Is that okay?
That sounds good.
Okay.
Well, let me just kind of step back and sort of tell at least my version of the story of why we got to this place of sort of this platform where the region engages and comes together and does a variety of things, and we're able to respond to that. I think our history sort of happens sort of in kind of 3 waves. In the 1970s, when we were formed, we were largely driven by a federal planning agenda, as most regional councils were. There was a ton of regional planning money that came out of Washington, and we were all responding to it on everything from hospitals to land use to housing to infrastructure. And it was during that time, I think, that we built up sort of the standards of professionalism and this sort of stance of neutrality and this role of bringing different levels of government together. It was that was sort of the foundation that we worked from. But then almost overnight, in the late 70s and then into the 80s, that money evaporated, and there was just really pretty much down to transportation, and all of the other federal investments in regional concepts went away. And regional councils across the country did sort of one of two things, or somewhere in the middle. They either just honed in on transportation and pretty much became MPOs, no matter how they were structured, and others sort of then kept those sort of traditional roles, but also then turned to their local governments and said, sort of, how can we be a platform to bring value to you through cooperation? And we were one of the latter ones who started listening and engaging more proactively and more intentionally with our local leadership and saying, how can we respond to the agenda that you created? And then a couple of things happened. We lost an Air Force base. We had a huge disaster in the hotel. Some of you may remember where Skywalk collapsed. And overnight, every hospital bed and every ambulance was engaged in a way they had never been engaged all across the metropolitan area. About the same time, we had a heat wave that called on this huge regional response that nobody was ready for. And it was sort of out of that crisis, really, that shared challenge, that the local leadership, elected officials, public safety officials, city managers, and others kind of said, you know, we've got some work to do in building up some infrastructure so that we can work together in responding to the common challenges that we all have. And it was during that period of time, I think, as an agency, we became good at building consensus, at really solidifying the value relationship with local leadership, and moving to a variety of revenue streams that would allow us to bring resources in different kinds of ways to support our cooperative efforts. And then as we moved into the 1990s, and there was sort of a rise of understanding that we are a single regional economy, and there was more confidence in the work of the agency, and local governments had more confidence in this idea of working with one another, is really when many of the things that I talked about sort of took off. And we began to be asked and called upon by the community to take on more and more assignments because there was some value in that process. So kind of stepping back from that, I think what has really driven our evolution has been, first and foremost, has been necessity, which is the mother of all invention. There was a need there. There was a shared opportunity, a shared challenge. And sometimes it was just that federal money was available, but other times it was because the local leaders or civic community said we need to go there. We have a very complicated region, and by default almost, we became a vehicle by which things could get done. I think secondly, what has made a difference is sort of the approach that we've taken to problem solving. I sort of say that I've learned over the years three things really matter in this work, and one of which is leadership. We don't do anything that somebody else doesn't want us to do. We don't do anything unless a point of leadership comes from around the region to sort of step forward. And it's not just somebody saying take that hill. It's people like you who understand how to work together, understand how to problem solve together. They engage people. It's this particular style of leadership, and we have helped to cultivate an environment in which that style of leadership can flourish and emerge. I think the second thing, and you will all understand this, that really matters in this work is process matters. None of this work happens just by accident or happens just by coming around the table. There has to be methodical processes. The change process really almost needs to be engineered in a way so that you're dealing with issues sort of in a sequential way and getting out the facts, getting the right people at the table, developing a neutral platform, identifying your principles early. And there's some very intentional things that we strive to do and have gotten better at over the years that enable us to be effective when we work on one problem or another, because we think about how the process should work to get an outcome. And that's the third thing that sort of really matters in this work, is that results matter. The objective is not to collaborate, it's not to plan. The objective is to make a difference in the towns that we all represent and are here to serve in the lives of people that live here. And so we are very intentional and have demonstrated our ability over time to get stuff done, to get something out the door that makes a difference in people's lives or on the ground. And so that sort of results focus, that process focus, and that leadership focus create sort of an environment in which you can build trust, and that's really the glue that pulls us together, trust across institutions, across jurisdictions, and it's that trust that then I think has enabled us to sort of move forward. I would say that we also have a very nimble, flexible culture within our organization. We're able to respond and shift very quickly, and that has a lot to do with how we manage our internal affairs and the kind of people we hire. Our roles vary greatly. Sometimes we are sort of the backbone that brings everybody together. Other times we're the transportation expertise that's coming to a table that somebody else is setting and kind of taking the lead on. The funding work stream varies in all of this work. At the end of the day, there aren't that many places to get money. You get it from grants, you get it from fees, you get it from passing the hat, or you get it from corporate underwriting, and we do all of it. And I can talk more about that maybe in the workshop about how we go about doing some of that kind of stuff. And then I would say finally, and I think I'm going to stop here just in the interest of time, we get presented with a lot of issues. They come from lots of places. I think federal and state leaders and opportunities and state laws sometimes are a major source of leadership. Our elected leaders, either who are on the board or not on the board, often bring ideas forward. Our work in first suburbs, as I said, came entirely out of the work of mayors. Most of our work comes from professional staff. Public Works and fire guys are particularly prolific. I think it's partly because they have a kind of shared underpinning of professional strategy and outlook that allows them to sort of come to the table and more quickly move an issue forward. And so they bring a lot of the ideas. Our Operation Greenlight system was because a couple of our Public Works directors, one on either side of the state line, knew that they did this in Clark County, Nevada, and they said, we want to do that here. And they came downtown and said, let's figure out how to move this idea forward. And it took a few years, but it got done. And then oftentimes it comes, our work, especially in human services, comes from civic sectors, where a community process will get underway, it will get so far, and they'll come to us and ask us to lead implementation or to carry the next step. I mean, our work in homelessness began with a task force at the Bar Association. They took it to the mayor's office. The mayor said, homelessness isn't just our problem. He started inviting other cities into it. They published a 300-page report. It was brilliant. And then they said, well, what are we going to do next? And so they kind of brought it across the street, and we were involved in some of this work and said, help us lead this work forward. And so we've helped to raise some philanthropic resources and keep the committees and processes together to move that agenda forward. And so when we get presented with these things, we have sort of a choice to make. Do we do it or not? And we don't have a formal mechanism for doing this, but at the end of the day, it kind of boils down to 3 or 4 considerations. The first of which is whether we're wanted. We tend not to go to places where we're not wanted, and unless there's sort of some external request, it's really hard to sort of put an idea out there for which there's no market or interest. I think second, we sort of ask ourselves, can we make a difference? Is this something that we really can do something about, or are we just doing this for show? And we are not about make work, and so it's if we can't make a difference, we tend to sort of pull away or find that out earlier. We obviously ask typical questions of fit, whether it's compatible with our mission and our goals, and whether it's multi-jurisdictional. We tend not to add value if there's just 2 cities or governments involved. We add value if there's 3 or more. Otherwise, those 2 can just sort of work together, but we bring value as a neutral platform if there's sort of 3 or more parties that need to come together around the issue, whether it's consistent with local government expectations. And then finally, we need to make sure there's a business model that will support the work over time. And that's probably the question we answer least effectively. Sometimes we get into things that are clearly lost leaders, and they don't get very far. We have to adjust expectations, or we have to grow them over time into being something that's more meaningful and impact. I would say what's common to everything that we do is there's always a place of oversight. Everything that I talked about has a group that we work in support of. We're the platform that other people come together to do what they want to do in a collective kind of way. I think my experience with local governments over time, I used to be a city manager, is that at the end of the day, a local government really wants to retain the ability to be responsive to its own citizen base. And so if it's sharing a service or sharing a problem, you've got to maintain the ability to respond to the people that call you at midnight, and I've gotten those calls. I think secondly, local governments really want to retain policy control. They want to drive the destiny of their communities. At the end of the day, that's why we form local governments, is sort of to drive the destiny of this place we care about, and they do not want to let go of that, and that's by virtue of why they exist. And I think third, they want adaptability, they want flexibility. They want to be, if they don't want to marry a regional process, but they want to participate in it, and if it's not meeting their needs, they want to renegotiate the terms of engagement over time. And so those issues of responsiveness and policy control and flexibility are sort of embedded in all of the work that I just mentioned. None of these are sort of binding contracts or commitments. They're all voluntary, and there is always an oversight mechanism in which the local leadership sort of drives the agenda, and then we're supporting the response to that. I think in a similar vein, what's common to all of our work is that it represents a coalition of willing partners. We do little we do nothing, I would say, that sort of compels people to engage. The closest that we get to it is our MPO work, and you know that world. There's sort of you have to play at this table in order to receive resources. But other than that, everything else is a matter of organizations, local governments, community groups deciding to come together. And then in a similar vein, but this is really a point worth making, and I'll end on, is that there really, as almost always in these issues, sort of somebody outside of our agency that's driving the change. We are much more effective when we have a mayor, we have a city council member, we have a county commissioner, we have a business leader, we have a couple of public works directors, a couple of fire chiefs who really are passionate about getting something done. And it is their sort of ability to articulate the vision for what they're striving to get done that we then support and build processes around and build systems around so that they can be effective over time. And so I'm going to end there. I was going to, and maybe at lunch we can talk a little bit about some of our specific work around the economy or around first suburbs or any other issues that you're particularly interested in. But let me just end there, and we can take the break, Madam Chairman, and we'll
Thank you
unless
very
you have
much.
questions now.